Hello, Matthias. Let's begin this short uh, consultation, philosophical inquiry session. Um, so, first of all, do you have something to bring to the session today? I usually refer to this as a question, but at this stage it may not be. It just may be an issue or a statement even, or anything at all that you just want to bring to start with, and we will try and build from there. But the idea is that in the first session, the first part of the session, we'll certainly be trying to establish what the question is, trying to establish what that is, and trying to, in some way, formulate it as a question. But we don't have to necessarily start literally with a question. So that's the how do you have you got something that you can bring?
Yes. And I can formulate it as a question. So I was wondering, why is understanding things so important to me? That would be my issue.
Why is understanding things so important to me? Okay. Um, well, first of all, do you want to say anything about your question before we start?
Yeah, I think this has always been a significant aspect of my being since I was a kid. As I can remember, I wanted to understand things. And when I encounter something, I want to, investigate it or read about it, understand it, see how it functions. So I seem to have a problem with not understanding things, just letting things go, letting things be. I want to know why are they like they are? How do they work? How does it function?
Yeah. So what I will often do with a client, just to let you know, I'll often describe what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. A number of reasons for this is so that you, as a client, can learn the techniques yourself. You can take them away and you can reuse them as and when. So that's one of the things that I like to do is to sort of actually package these things in some way conceptually for you to be able to use and reuse in different contexts. So just to give you a sense of what I said then, do you have anything to say about the question? Well, of course, this in itself straight away gets us into a meta mode. Right? You'll be thinking not just about answering the question, but about thinking about the question in whatever way that may be. And one very important move that I've used for many years is what I call um, seeking salience. Um, so salience is more than just relevance. Relevance is, of course, what we want. We want to be able to, in philosophy, say things that are relevant to the question, to the issues. But salience is where we see among what's relevant, what really matters and what's important. So this is a very important concept. And when somebody asks a question, one very good way to get them into a meta mode and to think about the salience issue and to try and spot salience is to simply ask them, so can you say why you asked that question? So I wonder, that's essentially what I'm doing here. You've asked a question, and I just want to start by asking you why you've asked the question. You've said something about it, but now is there anything more you can say about why you've asked the question? Unless it's what you've already said, which is fine.
Well, it connects to this, but I think yeah, I want to understand myself as well, and I see it's a bit, yeah, I want to understand why I want to understand, so it's getting almost a circle here, but yes, I think it's because I've reflected a bit about this, that I see it's such a strong urge in me to understand things. It's not just I could bring up whatever, but here I see it's a really significant aspect of me that I want to understand. I've studied a lot, spent lots of years at university studying different things, so it's yeah, part of my strong driving force that I have. So that's why I want to, understand more about it.
Great, thank you. Well, are you familiar with the distinction, if there is such a clear thing, between psychology and philosophy?
Uh, yes, I would say yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you this question. To what extent do you think your question and your concern today is psychological? And to what extent would you say it's philosophical? And as far as you understand those terms,
But I would guess the way I put it, it would be more psychological.
you think the question that you've brought today is more psychological?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, why would you say that's more psychological?
It's the to me at the end there that it seems that it wasn't so much about understanding in general, understanding things, but why I think this is important. So
Ah, that's interesting. So why does that, the presence of the I, the to me, why do you think that makes it more psychological?
um, because it focuses on the function of my own mind, how I think, how I function, rather than putting it in context with some exterior aspects.
Okay. Does that mean that if it's more exterior, it's more philosophical?
If it is outside of the workings of the mind, exterior in that sense, yes, yes.
And is how I think about something or how I function necessarily psychological?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. Why is that?
Because, well, how I think about things could be just a rational understanding of my worldview, my the workings of my brain from physiological aspect, or let's see how I can rationalize things, how I can conceptualize things, how I can clarify things. Maybe that would be more approaching the philosophical aspects of my thinking, where the psychological may be more about my feelings and my emotions.
Mm. So do you still hold the view that your question today is more psychological or is a psychological? I think at one point you said it was a psychological question.
But based on what I just said, well, no, I changed my mind here. I would say it's more philosophical.
Ah, right. So it's actually not just to some extent philosophical, but more philosophical.
Um, yes, if I now define the psychological aspects as more as how I feel about things and my emotions and so on. So this would be more about, yeah, my thinking. But I see I have a problem separating them and my thinking, my functioning. It's, when I'm talking about myself, it's a bit hard to differentiate what is psychological, what is philosophical.
So was the distinction that you were struggling with there between thinking and how you think and how you function, is that right?
How I think and how I function, yes.
Mm. Um, I wonder, are you able to articulate what the difference is between how you think and how you function?
Mm. Yeah, the functioning, I would say, is broader. It can contain the thinking, but it's also actions, reactions, intuitions, whatever goes on inside me and outside. So thinking can be part of it, but it's more than thinking.
It's more than thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any more to say on that or anything else we've said before I move to the next bit?
Um, no, I think we can move to the next bit.
Okay. Got one last question about this opening section before we then return to the question itself. Um, you mentioned the word want to a number of times at the beginning. So when I asked you, can you say something about this, or can you say why you've asked the question? I think you said something about, as a kid, I want to understand things. I want to do this. And I think want came up a lot. And then at one point, you even mentioned, I want to understand why I want to understand.
Mm.
So I wonder if we could do a brief reflection on this word or the concept of want. Um, anything to say on what you mean? Can you say what you mean by want?
Well, it means that I have some desires, some wishes. So it's something compelling, that yeah, it's something which is hard to resist. And so it seems to be pretty reflective. You could even say it's a bit childish, infantile. I want this, without even thinking about why I want it. I just want it.
Yep. Okay. Um, okay, well let's try this. You said compelling, hard to resist, childish, infantile. Interesting reflections on this. So, hmm, to what extent does choice come into this?
Of course, I can make a choice, as far as I take a step back and reflect on what it is that I want, and then I can make a conscious decision if I should go with it or not go with it. But of course, when I say I want to, it looks like the choice is not so much there. It's more an immediate desire. Then I would have to reflect upon it before I then would be able to actually make a choice.
Hmm. So when you say why is understanding things so important to me, how does the word important function there?
Well, now it seems that it would be desire. Maybe if I would formulate it now, I would probably, instead of talking about importance, I would talk about a desire. Why do I have this desire? So it would be intellectualizing it to say it's important to me, where it looks like it's more some desire I have.
Great. So what you're doing now is you're starting to do the thing that I'm going to come to next, and that is to return to the question that you've brought today, why is understanding things so important to me? And ask you if you, in any way, want to revise this question. Is the question that you started with the one that you want to stick with, or do you want to reformulate that in some way?
I would reformulate it to why is the desire to understand things so strong in me?
Why is the desire to understand things so strong in me? Now, what we don't have to do, of course, is reject the first question. These all connect up. So this becomes part of our process, is seeing how the question develops, in what way it's changing, and what that tells us, what we can draw from the contrasts between the different formulations. So I don't know if you've been writing them down, but I usually do recommend that clients have some pen and paper to jot things down on. Um, and certainly we would want to keep why is understanding things so important to me? And now we have this new revised version. Why is the desire to understand things so strong in me? And again, I might ask you a similar question about whether they are psychological, to what extent this is psychological and or philosophical. But before we do, let's just stop and take a little bit of a sort of break. Uh, how are you feeling so far? How are you getting on with this? And any reflections on what we've done so far?
Yeah, well, I'm feeling good. I think it's interesting. Yeah, reflection would be this switch from importance to desire. There wasn't, I wasn't so conscious about it that it looks more like, yeah, pre-reflective desire rather than something which I tried to put in more intellectual terms. So this switch was interesting. And also the difficulty I had between defining this as philosophical or psychological was also
Mm.
interesting. So that was it was still, hard for me to see in my question here what is philosophical, what is psychological. So,
Well, of course, it's as I said, alluded to earlier, it's not an exactly clear distinction, but it still probably is helpful for us to engage with thinking about that distinction, the relationship. Okay, good. Now, what I'm doing to begin with, and this is something I would say to clients in general, as I've said to you already, is to try and arrive at a question. But I'm also making notes of questions and things that come up, things we can return to. Um, so at the moment, we have what I would call a provisional task question. A task question is a question that we are explicitly working on, one that we're trying in some way to answer. Um, and I call this provisional task question because, of course, it keeps changing as the discussion goes on. So we now have provisional task question 2. Okay. And we have some key concepts, desire, importance. You can think about how those things relate. But another thing I like to do is to have a look at the question that we've got and think of it in abstract and concrete terms. So I very often ask a client to have an a concrete question that in some way relates to something in the world, to a specific and particular issue. And at the moment, we seem to have the concrete question in as far as it's about you
mm,
and about your particular desires, values. When I see the word importance, I'm thinking we've got values, we've got desires here now. So we've got some important things to work with here. So my next question would be, if we have a concrete question, why is the desire to understand things so strong in me? Let's just name that as our task question for now. Um, do you think there are is there an abstract formulation of this question? It may turn out to be more than one question.
um, well, it can be, why is understanding important? Yeah, why would understanding be a desire?
Yeah. And what we could do, because these questions could be philosophical, but they also have quite a strong psychological dimension to them.
Yeah.
So what I would do is make some suggestions to tweak those to help us keep a philosophical thing as well. So rather than why is understanding important, we might say, well, how can understanding be important?
Yes.
Or why would understanding be a desire? Well, how can understanding be understood as a desire? Something like that.
Yes.
And of course, what we end up there with is an interesting thing in that understanding is now being applied to the question about understanding.
Mm.
How can understanding be understood as a
Yes.
desire? So let me ask you this question then. Okay, so we've got a few things we can go with there in terms of separating and pursuing. But I'm going to bring in another question here, just at this exploratory stage, because I think a philosophy at the early stages, when we're exploring something and trying to, it's quite messy. We want to kind of just sort of bring in things and then we can tie them all up later or find a thread later. And I think at the beginning stages of an inquiry, very often it's exploratory before we get into the more sort of focused justificatory mode, which will often come later. So, um, all right. So I'm going to put a negative version of your question to you to see how you respond. Why is understanding things so important to me, or why is the desire to understand things so strong in me? So let's put it this way. Um, would you in any way want not to have the desire to understand things?
Yes, yes.
Ah, let me just write that down. Would you in any way like not to understand things? And Interestingly, your response was a straight yes. So could you say a little bit more about why you said yes?
I think that when you have a strong desire, a strong wish for something, it binds you. You're kind of tied to this desire, so you can feel less free than if you don't have these strong desires. So not having the feeling, the importance, having the desire to understand things or whatever, you can feel more liberated. You can do it or not do it, whatever. It won't mean so much to you. If I have this strong desire and I don't do it, I might feel that okay, I'm not doing something that I should do. So it could be liberating not to have this.
Could be liberating. And liberating because,
Because I wouldn't have this, I wouldn't be compelled by this desire who kind of forces me in a certain direction. I could just be able to make a more conscious decision, do it, not do it, and it wouldn't be such a big deal. So in that case, I would be more free to choose what I wanted to do. Whereas if I have a strong desire, I'm not so free to I can make a choice, but it's not so free.
hmm,
So I'm strongly pulled in a certain direction.
is it Aristotle that said man desires to know?
He did.
Yeah, that sort of rings a bell somewhere in the back of my memory. And okay, so this is interesting. Uh, what, now, here we have a place where I could engage more with you in a more direct sort of parity sort of situation, where I'm less the counselor and I become a co-explorer, co-inquirer, and we think together. And this feels like it might be one of those times where we might be able to do that.
Mm.
So if you're happy to, we can do something a little bit more um, exploratory in a more uh, equal-based way, if you want to.
Yes.
And this
Well,
feels like it might be a good place for that.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do
And
it.
so for a set period of time, let's do that. We're going to change the mode of engagement so that I can become a little bit more exploring with you. All right. So would you like in any way not to understand things? And you talked about choice, liberating from having this as a choice rather than a compulsion. So it's getting me thinking about the nature of philosophy and its relationship to choice. And one of the things that we see with Socrates is that sometimes some of his practices, some of the things he does, seem somewhat, he's compelled to do them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he says this, doesn't he? I speak to my demon
Oh, yes, yes. He does.
and that stuff. And the demon, I think, says something more along the lines of, it tells me what not to do rather than what to do. Socrates, Aristotle describes this as a sort of basic human thing. Man desires to know.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to explore this idea of actually getting away from that as a desire. Would we still want to know? Does it even make sense to speak about wanting to know without desire?
It doesn't make sense to speak about a want to, some whatever, if we have no desire, no.
So, to what extent do you think desire is necessary to knowledge, to understanding things?
Um, I don't think I mean, I think it's possible to understand things without desire, it could happen just, you run across something, someone tells you something, whatever, you pick up things along the way, you could learn things. But then it would be rather unstructured. I think if you want some kind of systematic understanding, you need to have an idea where you're going. So then I guess there would have to be some sort of desire for you to take the step to go somewhere and to want to learn something.
Mm. So this is interesting because now we're in a place where it seems that there has to be a desire, and yet at the same time you want to be liberated from the desire.
Yeah.
So is there a contradiction there?
Well, there has to be a desire in order to gain some kind of systematic knowledge. Yes. So yeah, it looks like if I didn't have the desire, I would just have whatever random knowledge I picked up along the way. So yeah, I think there would have to be desire. But maybe what I want is to decide when I have the desire and when I don't have it, which is, I don't know if that's possible.
Well, that's right. Does it make sense? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. This is a really great place for exploration. But I'd like to share something with you here that one way of understanding the philosophical process we get from the Socratic and particularly Aristotelian approach is that we start off by saying, okay, what are my intuitions? Well, my intuitions, this is what I think is the case, and I also think this. And we often have a philosophical problem when the two intuitions conflict.
Mm.
And one way of understanding a philosophical problem is exactly when this happens, what Aristotle calls an aporia, a problem, knot that needs to be untied. And Aristotle would very much put it in terms of, right, well, this is what the general people think, and this is what the experts think, and there's a tension here. Let's explore it, something like that. But in our own practice, it starts with, well, I think, if we go to, can you step in the same river twice? Well, I think we can, yeah, but I also think we can't, right? And then we have a problem. And we're trying to resolve that problem. And one way that philosophy actually can sometimes resolve problems is that it can sometimes dissolve the contradiction, the apparent contradiction. And there's a number of ways of doing that. One is to draw distinctions. This is the classic way in which philosophers do so. Well, if we mean by same, if we mean numerical sameness, then the answer would be this. But if we mean qualitative sameness, then the answer would be that, in the example of the river. So we could try a similar technique here. Something, I suppose one way of putting it very simply would be a technique I call carve it up. We're talking about desire.
Yeah.
Is there any sense in which we might be able to talk about different kinds of desire to help us approach apparent this apparent contradiction?
Yeah, I think we can talk about different kinds of desires, yes.
Okay. Okay. In which case, what let's begin. What
Yeah.
kinds of desire might we start to think of?
Well, I think we can have desires which can, at least to some extent, be controlled by or governed by reason. And we can have desires which are maybe more borders on needs. So
Ah.
you reason about them, but it doesn't make much sense because the desire is it doesn't let it be guided by reason.
So what was it? Got a reason-based desires,
Yeah.
and the other one was
Well,
sorry,
it seems closer to a need that
need.
it's yeah, something
Okay.
you cannot stop yourself from doing.
Well, okay. So if I may challenge here a little,
Yeah.
stopping yourself from doing something, is that actually when you can't stop yourself from doing something, is that a need or a compulsion, which we might distinguish between? It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Extent
I
to
can say
we
that both compulsion and need are some things that you cannot stop yourself from doing.
mm,
Okay. For a while, you can postpone a need, but ultimately, eventually, you will have to do it. But maybe compulsion is more immediate. You have to do it right now.
mm. If we were to talk about I mean, perhaps as an inquirer, I'm seeing need as okay. Let's throw this out there and see what you think. Um, need could be something which is more external, coming from outside. Compulsion more internal, coming from inside.
Yes, yes.
So, to what extent are need and compulsion the same or different?
Um, well, it would be different in the sense that need would be something more fundamental, maybe something more biological, something okay, you need to eat, you need to sleep, etc. So, and in that sense, maybe more more objective, let's say to the human race or whatever. But compulsion then could be more psychological. It could come from the inside, something you, for some reason, cannot stop yourself from doing.
Mm.
Need would be more, if I don't do it, I might die or something terrible will happen if it is a need. But compulsion, the consequences of not doing it might not be significant at all, but there is a strong driving force in you which compels you to do it.
So, could there be needs that we are not compelled to do, and we could in fact not do them? But if we don't do them, there'll be serious consequences.
Yeah.
And that might be different from a compulsion,
Yes.
literally can't stop.
Yeah.
So then we might want to think of examples. Can we think of examples where there's a need, but I may still not yet be compelled to satisfy that need?
Yes. Yeah, I'm thinking of sleeping. If I have something which I think is more urgent, I have to do this. I feel I need to sleep, but I have to finish this before. So this will be more compelling to me right now to do this,
Mm.
or eating, something as
Yeah.
well. You can decide not to eat. It will have serious consequences eventually, but you can decide no for different reasons. I don't want to eat.
And what about something like giving up smoking?
Yeah.
So another example of something that might be a need that we
Uh,
don't
yes.
necessarily choose to.
Oh, yes, yes, indeed. It can be a physiological need, the addiction to nicotine, but well, yes, you can decide not to do it.
Okay, good. I mean, I'm not that up on the philosophy or psychology or science of desire. So this might be something that we might want to look into. It might be good for us to, between sessions, to have a look into the psychology of desire, the philosophy of desire, and actually look at what the literature has to offer. But one thing I am familiar with, um, I'm not sure to what extent you're familiar with this, is what's sometimes known as first and order second desire. First order and second order desire, sorry.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this distinction?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Well, how do you understand it?
Well, the way I understand it is that, well, I think it's first order desire. You want to do something like, let's say, you want to drink. You're an alcoholic. You want to drink. That's your desire to have a drink. But the second order desire, you don't want to be the person who wants to have this desire. So on another level, you have the desire not to want to drink. You have the desire not to have this desire. I don't know if this is what you're talking about, that this was what came to my mind.
Well, let's see what you think. Because earlier on you said, I want to understand why I want to understand.
Mm.
So is that an example of second order desire, first order desire distinction?
Yeah, it would be. Sounds like a second order desire.
Mm. So what does that help you understand? the question?
Right now, no. Well, what I can see about this question is that then it would be more broader. I want to understand something more general about me rather than just this particular thing. If I want to understand why I want to understand, it would be more about my understanding in general rather
Hmm.
than this
So,
particular thing.
so where it says I want to understand why I want to understand, is either of these, for instance, a more reason-based desire? Is one of them more need-based, compulsive?
Yeah, I want to understand why I want to understand is more reason-based.
The whole thing or both? Because there's two parts to it. There's I want to understand why I want to understand, and there's I want to understand.
Mm.
So there's the first one, I want to understand why I want to understand. And then there's the I want to understand. And would you say they're both reason-based?
No, the first one is reason-based. I want to understand why it would be reason-based.
And the other one?
The other one would be more of the desire.
Desire or a need?
Um, yeah, it's a good, good one. I would call it a desire.
Call it desire.
Yeah.
Is it, so for instance, let's play around with the words.
Mm.
Is it I need to understand why I want to understand? Or is it I want to understand why I need to understand? Or is it I'm compelled to understand? Do you see what I mean? I'm
Yeah, I
playing
see.
around with the different distinctions we've drawn here to see if any of them make more sense.
Mm. Yeah, I want to understand where I need to understand makes more sense. Yeah.
Okay, let's say that again.
I want to understand where I need to understand.
I want to understand why I need to understand.
Yeah.
Hmm. Any more to say on that?
Um, yeah, it looks like it is probably a need to understand more than a desire. And I would think for me and on a level of humanity as well, I mean, I think we have a need to understand. So it's probably more than just a desire.
Does this, do you think this doing this work here just now has given us any clarity? Or given you any clarity?
Well, it made clear to me that I wasn't differentiating between the let's call them emotional desires and the more rational wishes I had, and I was confusing them. So, and I wasn't thinking clearly about when I say I want to, am I talking about an intellectual endeavor here, or am I talking about another desire? So I didn't make this distinction when I asked the question. So this to 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 clarify or to distinguish these two, to clarify at least that they maybe should be distinguished. It's I think it's useful.
Okay. Well, there's one other aspect here I want to think about, and that's the why.
Mhm.
Because in all the questions, formulations, there seems to be a why. Why is understanding things so important to me? Um, why is the desire to understand things so strong in me? And I've got some different kinds of why, which are quite useful.
Yeah.
So let's start with this and see if you can think of any more. One is that when we ask the question why, we're asking a causal explanation. This is one way in which why functions. Why did the door close? Because the wind blew it.
Yeah.
Another kind of why is the justification. What are the reasons you have in support of your conclusion, that kind of thing. Um, so why do you think we shouldn't eat meat, for instance?
Mm.
Another one, and these overlap a little bit, but I think they're significantly different enough to separate out. Another one would be the purpose why. Why did you do that? What was your overall goal or aim? So with these different kinds of why in mind, and maybe others that we can think of, it's worth having a look at your questions again.
Yeah.
Are there equivocations? Equivocation is in English a sort of critical thinking tool that means where you're using the same word in different places, but with different meanings.
Okay.
So usually if you're looking at an argument with premises and conclusions,
Mm.
equivocation is when you've used one word in one sense in a premise, and then maybe in a different sense in another premise or conclusion.
Okay.
And this makes the argument look good, but actually it's a fallacy. So it's known as the fallacy of equivocation. But I'm interested here to see if there's equivocation. So for instance, in the provisional task question we started with, why is understanding things so important to me? It's worth thinking about the function of why here. And then in the reformulation, why is the desire to understand things so strong in me? Is it functioning in the same way? Or is there some kind of change in emphasis?
Mm.
Meaning?
Well, the first one sounds more causal.
Right, okay. So why is understanding things so important to me? Sounds causal.
Yeah. What? Okay. So what is the reason?
However, do you remember you said, and that might explain why you thought that was more psychological to begin with,
Yeah.
because there was perhaps something more causal in the why.
Mm. Yes. Yes.
We can come back to that because you actually changed your mind about that. So that might be significant.
Mm. Mm.
Okay, the other one. Why is the desire to understand things so strong in me? Is that also causal? I mean, it might be. So I'm not suggesting that it's
Yeah.
not necessarily.
Well, I think so.
Another possibility, of course, is that it's not actually clear which form of why it is.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it feels not as clear as the first formulation, which which I saw as causal. So this, I don't know. I'm hesitating about this one.
It's I can see why as well. It's really interesting. So what we can do is, I think, a way forward, perhaps for the next session, is to spend some time on seeing what's going on here with regard to the whys. And a question I would put is this: to what extent is the why in PTQ1 and PTQ2, provisional task question one, provisional, to what extent is the why causal? And to what extent is the why justificatory?
Hmm.
That might be the question I'd want to put to you because it gives us a range. Because I think one problem here is to think simply in terms of binaries. It's either the causal or the justificatory. And once we start to pull it out, we might find that actually there's an element of both, which might suggest why you were hesitating about it being more psychological or philosophical.
Yeah.
So that might be the thing to think about is to what extent both of these questions are, um, to what extent the why is causal, to what extent is justificatory.
Okay.
And I think that might give us some clarity on how to approach the issue what you want to address.
Hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. It could.
So,
Okay. Give some insight into whether yeah, I'm trying to justify my desire for understanding here, or is some
Spain.
understanding my own psychology, or what is it that I'm after, really?
Okay, so what I would normally do, because it feels kind of like a we're coming to a natural end of this particular sort of
Yeah.
part, you know, and also time-wise.
Mm.
So what I'll suggest we do now is go to the pies part of my session. Pies, P-I-E-S, and maybe another S, P-I-E-S, bracket S. And it's a way of kind of taking a synoptic view of the conversation. It's a way of thinking about the conversation from a bird's eye perspective. And also, it helps us to think a little bit more metacognitively about the process that we've been through and the process we're about to go through.
Mm.
So the pies approach is this. I start by asking you, I wonder if in a few sentences, not too long, whether you can précis, that's the P, our conversation today. What is it you think we've discussed?
We have discussed the implication of my question. What does it mean? What do I mean by this question? And see, was my question clear to me, to myself? Was this the question I wanted to ask, or was let's say the real question hiding behind it? So yeah, clarifying my intention with this and clarifying my understanding of what I was bringing to the discussion.
Great. Okay, the next question is, was there anything that particularly interested you? That's the I, interest. Was there anything that particularly interested you in the discussion?
Um, but one thing was the trying to make the differentiation between psychological and physical, philosophical, which was very difficult. So it was interesting that this, which I thought was a rather clear difference to me, turned out to be quite hard to separate.
Okay.
So I don't really know whether my own question is philosophical or psychological. That I think that is interesting.
Yes. Well, interestingly, as a practitioner doing this, I tend to find that pretty much any question has a philosophical dimension to it.
Yeah.
But it can also have lots of other dimensions too, empirical, psychological, historical, and so on. And I think one way uh, of dealing with doing philosophy is that you don't have to clearly say this is philosophy and that's not, that's history. We don't do that. It's more a case of no, that we can acknowledge that there are lots of aspects to our question and our concerns, but what we want to do is try and find the philosophical dimension to it, whatever that may be. And that's why I think sometimes people can jettison questions that don't sound philosophical, but actually what they've just not done yet is get to the philosophical bit. um, so what we're doing in philosophical counseling is emphasizing the the philosophy. Okay, that's great. The other one in the pies questions is the E, evaluation. So broadly speaking, was there anything that was said today that you agreed or disagreed with, that either I said or you said or came up?
Um, Nothing that comes to mind. Uh, no disagreement. I don't think so. No.
It wasn't, the mode was never terribly heuristic anyway. It was never particularly combative or challenging, but it didn't feel like that was required either. So, um, okay. And then finally, the S of pies, or the two S's, but the first and primary one is, um, was there anything that was said today that you thought was particularly important? And that is the salience point. So was there anything that was said today that you thought was particularly important, especially from the point of view of trying to address your question?
Mm, well, maybe it was the different types of why.
Ah,
So what lies behind the why that I used? Since, yes, like you pointed out, my questions were why questions. But then what kind of why questions were there? So yeah, I think that's an important part.
it's very often the case that the distinctions are the things that are pointed out here,
Yeah.
which goes to show the importance or salience of uh, distinctions in philosophical practice. I
Mm.
think they're really central to what we say philosophy is. The use of and application of distinction drawing to create nuance, to help resolve tensions, as I described earlier, apparent or paradoxes and contradictions and so on. So that's quite a common move at this stage. And the last S, which is in brackets, um, and sometimes people have an idea about this or not, is strategy. So is there anything that you would like to do or have any idea about going forward with regard to process, critical thinking tools, moves? Now, the reason this is in brackets is because very often clients and students in classrooms just don't know what they are. So this tends to be something I ask people if they have a grasp of critical thinking tools and skills, or if I've taught some. So this is in brackets because it's provisional on conditional upon the client or the student having some idea of what strategies there could be. I can provide suggestions for strategies, but it's always good to ask if somebody thinks there's something they would like. And also, it's worth pointing out that very often the strategy will have something to do with the salient point they've raised.
Mm.
So if they think that there's something important or something particularly interesting, then very often the strategy, from my point of view, will be going to involve those two aspects to some extent.
Yeah.
And look, if we look at it, what you've written or what you suggested in the interest and the salience have connection, clear connection. So what you found interesting was the distinction between the psychological and the philosophical, and the salience was the different kinds of why,
Mm.
which of course manifest the same distinction in different ways, the causal and the justificatory, um, as possible. Certainly, justificatory tends to be more kind of philosophical in the way we do philosophy, and the causal tends to be more science. But of course, psychology is sometimes more that way and more this way, depending on which psychology school we're interested in. So anyway, any ideas on strategy or how we should go forward, and bearing in mind what you found interesting and particularly what you found salient?
What I'm thinking about is I mean, the reason why I bring this question. So it's this when I come with a question is it's for some reason an issue for me. And why is this even an issue for me? So to discover this, which would be beyond wise understanding, important for me or desirable for me, but why do you even care? Why is this an issue for you in the first place?
Mm,
Discover that bit could be interesting.
right, right. So this is what I call the so what aspect of doing philosophy.
Yeah.
It's I once characterized philosophy as if so, why so? If not, why not? And also, and so what?
Yeah.
So very often philosophy is about saying, well, it's provisional, it's conditional. If we think this, then what do we think that means, or how do we justify that? And if not, why not? Think about that. And the ultimate question then comes to, so what? Why does this matter?
Mm.
What is the relevance and how does this apply to my life or meaning and so on?
Yeah.
And does it matter that it doesn't matter? Here's another question we can ask.
Mm.
So, okay, great. So that gives us some sort of strategy for how we might approach things next week. I will clarify some notes here and try and get things in order. So I've got some clearer structure for how we approach things next week. Because at the moment, I've just got lots of pieces of paper with lots of notes and questions. And what I'm doing here is I'm using an approach called the emergent question approach. And the emergent question approach is that we have an explicit question, which I call a task question. And we had two of those, two different formulations. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to find out what the real questions are we're doing here. And very often they're coming up in all the other things that you say. So at one point you said, I want to understand why I want to understand. I jot that down and that becomes something that we can refer to. And although it's not stated as a question, I treat it as one. I treat pretty much everything as a question. So I want to understand why I want to understand. Why? What does that mean? Everything that's said is put into the why, and what does that mean? Sort of justification, hermeneutical, what do we mean by? Or how can that be understood, and so on. So what I'm doing is I want to now order these so because this will be part of how we go forward, is all these questions. We have a load of questions that came up today, and it'd be good for me to then sort of write them up as questions and put them to you so that you've got something to see how it's all threaded together and what questions have come up and which ones you'd prefer to pursue and so on.
Yeah.
So that gives you a sense of what I'm doing here. I'm trying to find questions which are coming out of the discussion rather than necessarily the explicit ones that you've asked or that we're exploring. And very often that'll be where the interest comes. So the last thing to say is I would ask you a few questions, what we might call feedback questions. Normally I'd send these in the post or after the sessions, but today, for your purposes, you might want to know what they are. And it's things like, did you find the session, first of all, in any way enjoyable?
Yes, having a discussion about these, the issue that I brought, and having a philosophical discussion about it, I think that's generally, I think that's enjoyable. So just talking about this was fun. Yes,
Did you find it engaging?
it was engaging. Yeah, it was challenging. It was engaging. I felt lost and confused at some points, which yes, it, yeah, it requires me to engage my thinking capabilities. So indeed, it was.
So, well, as I say to children often, is when you feel lost and confused doing philosophy, it usually means you're doing it right. And for Socrates and Aristotle and others, that sense of aporia, being lost, is an important part of it. You don't do that, you're kind of probably not doing it right. Okay, did you find it valuable?
It was valuable since it clarified things in my questions that I hadn't thought about before. So the question turned out to be more complicated than I thought that it was, or we could see that it had more aspects, angles to it than I had considered at first. So yes, that was valuable.
Did it in any way make progress for you? Was there any progress made?
I'm thinking about this going into starting talking about desires that I
Mm.
see that there was a thought I had when we were talking about it. Okay, maybe if I'm not so intellectually compelled as I thought I was, maybe it's more of a desire that I thought I was, try to see myself as always engaging in some smart, clever intellectual endeavor, but maybe it's construction, after hand construction. Maybe it's some other kind of desire.
Mm.
It started me thinking, okay, why this desire instead of some other desire? So the
Right.
idea of desire, compulsion was very interesting.
Okay, so some kind of, and do you feel as though the sessions had direction? And I'm talking not just about what we did today, but what I've said something about what's happening next week as well in the following session.
It, it feels like it has a direction, yes, as you have different steps that you go through. Mhm.
Okay.
Indeed.
Um, and was there anything that you thought you could take away and use again and, transfer out of these sessions?
Well, yeah, the focus on how I ask the question, and what I mean with the words I use in the question. Uh, so the why, for instance, why did I use a why? Which why did I use?
Mm.
So instead of just throwing out the question, maybe thinking about, is this the question I want to ask? Or maybe there is another question that I really want to ask.
And out of interest, was there anything that I did that was in any way different or surprising from sessions that you've done with others?
I think it was well, one thing was the meta moment. You explain, okay, usually I do this, and why do we do this, and what we're going to do next, and so on. So this explanatory part, I haven't seen so much with other practitioners. That was a bit different. And then the rigor you put into this definition of words and different types of understanding words. Like we spent quite a lot of time on this why and different types of desires. Most other practitioners that I have experience of don't go so rigorously into
Mm.
examining the words. So they
That
find
surprises me, given philosophical practice and what it is.
well, they might hear word desire and they stick to this word, but maybe not examining it very carefully. What type
Right.
it is.
I mean, the one thing I'm perhaps not so surprised in is the way in which, even though they're philosophers, they might not stop and think about equivocations of, say, the word why. Um, so maybe that's one of those things that we might take for granted too much as philosophers, and not actually stop and think about how we're using it and the different ways in which we're using it. But that's interesting. Anything else?
Um, well, it was interesting this when we moved between different parts. So the more I forget the name now, but the more exploratory or conversational part of it, it felt more relaxed. Of course, it was easier. It wasn't so challenging. So the part that came before, it was a bit tougher, when you asked me more questions, and I was felt that okay, here is something I didn't really consider, and I tried to give a reasonable answer to it, but I realized I'm a bit confused here, so that was a bit. So that part was very challenging, and then there was another part which was more comfortable, and so on. So it was this transition from different modes was, I think, what was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's so there's a kind of formal aspect to it that feels less relaxed, and then a slightly informal approach which feels more relaxed.
Yeah.
Um, I should probably say that what you say at the beginning stage actually it doesn't matter too much because it's early stages, so it's no one's going to be sort of holding you to account, and we can come back to things later and develop them. Um, so, well, I mean, obviously I am going to be holding you to account to some extent, but no one's going to be saying that's the final and that's your position. So it's flexible and open. Okay. Oh, great. Well, if we've got nothing more to say on that, um, I think that'll be the end, I think.
Yeah, great. So,
Well, yeah, thanks very much. That was very enjoyable, and you were a
yeah,
great client. You sort of entered into the role very nicely. So that was great. Okay.